Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and it's going to be a really sensational episode. Hope everyone's weekend was good and everyone was able to relax and kick their feet up. I've been constantly checking my phone and anxiously awaiting to hear these new free agent alerts and where guys will be signing, because I think it's going to be a very interesting offseason, and who knows, maybe we'll get a little, early Christmas present with some big free agent signings. We've got a ton to discuss, like I mentioned, for today's episode. A lot of news going around the league. So I want to first get into a little bit of news, like I mentioned, going around the league. Some more award winners announced recently, some free agents deciding on some qualifying offers, and some new moves being made around the league, and just any other sort of news that's been going on. Afterwards, I'll get into a debate between which free agent is more valuable of a player to teams, JT Realmuto or Trevor Bauer. Since they are two of the most popular free agents on the market this year, I want to get into a conversation about which one is more valuable of a player. Later on, I'll continue to talk about Realmuto, as I'll get into a conversation on which teams will most likely target the catcher and which teams would be the best fit for Realmuto. And be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show, as I'll get into ranking the top free agents in this offseason and giving my opinion on who are the most talented free agents this year. A really, really good show, like I mentioned. But like I said, there's so much news that's been going on, and I want to jump into the recent awards that were handed out, because there was a couple awards that were given out recently. The Cy Young, the MVPs for both leagues this past week were announced. So I want to get into it. I'm going to start first with the Cy Young Award winners. And honestly, I wasn't shocked by either one winning. In the AL, Shane Bieber for the Cleveland Indians was the winner. And Bieber was by far the best pitcher, I think, in the MLB this year. I mean, he won the Triple Crown. He led the MLB in ERA with 1.63 ERA. He led the league in Ks with 122. He led the league in wins with 8. And he had the highest WAR for pitchers in the AL. So he clearly was a massive impact on his team. He had the highest Ks per 9 innings with 14.19, so he was moving through innings efficiently and quickly. Not to mention, first two starts of the year, he had 13 Ks and 14 Ks. I mean, it was either in the first game he had 13, in the second he had 14, or vice versa. Either way, he had 27 Ks through the first 2 games of the season. And then through the first 5 or 6 games, I'm pretty sure, 4 of those, they were double-digit strikeout numbers. So he had an unbelievable start to the year, and I think he really set the tempo early on, and that he was going to be the most dominant pitcher in this league. And he was part of a very good pitching rotation. I know that they lost Mike Clevinger during the trade deadline, and all sorts of issues they had with, Zach Plesac and guys, when they had Mike Clevinger, all the issues they had with him and not following protocol, this, that, and the other. But Shane Bieber really kind of kept his nose clean and didn't kind of steer in any sort of wrong directions, and he was very consistent the entire time. And he actually also, this is another thing, I always bring out quality starts because I think it's a great stat to really, gauge guys and gauge starters on who is being the most efficient in their starts, who's going the furthest distance, and who is giving up the least amount of runs. He had 83% of his starts come in as quality starts. He had 10 quality starts on the year. So he was absolutely sensational in just about every single start that he had. And he only had 21 walks the entire year, and he won 8 of his 12 starts. So when you think of that, and when you put those into perspective a little bit, it's pretty mind-blowing that anybody would even consider him not being the Cy Young winner. I mean, he was, like I keep saying, I feel like a broken record. He was literally untouchable the entire year. And I think his future is very bright. I think this is only the beginning. He's only 25 years old, 26 years old, so I think he's got a very, very bright future ahead of him. And it's no shock that he was named the first unanimous winner of the AL Cy Young since 2011 when Justin Verlander won it. I mean, his numbers they spoke for themselves. They really did. And he also set a record for the highest K rate at 41% for a year, and his ERA this last season was also the lowest since 1969 out of all qualifying pitchers. So a historic year, a monumental year, and really a year that I don't think anybody's going to forget that Bieber had, especially with the surrounding circumstances. And then over in the NL, Trevor Bauer, winner for the Cincinnati Reds, and this was a really great, this was a really, really great selection, I think. He was very, very deserving. He was he was almost as good as Shane Bieber. Not quite as good as him, but just about. And he had some unbelievable numbers. He led the NL in ERA with a 1.73 ERA. He was third in the MLB with 100 Ks, and he was one of only 3 pitchers this year to strike out triple-digit batters. He also led the NL in ERA plus this year with a 276 total. So needless to say, Bauer was, like Bieber, unstoppable for Cincinnati this year. And he really put himself, I think, into a good position for free agency. Last year he came over from the Cleveland Indians to the Cincinnati Reds. And we all know kind of how that unfolded with the Indians. He blew up in the middle of a game, took a ball, threw it in the center field when Terry Francona was coming out to, take him out of the game and pull him. Kind of, a little immature if you ask me. And he comes to Cincinnati. I think right when he gets there, his ERA doubles from what it was when he was at Cleveland at the time. I think it went from a 3 ERA to a 6 ERA. So really did not have a great year in 2019 all in all. 2020, though, completely different for Bauer. And that, again, brings back to my point of I think he's really set himself up for this free agency and for this offseason because he's by far, in my opinion, the most highly sought-after free agent right now in baseball. And, next to JT Realmuto probably, but he is on every single team's radar, not to mention he's willing to sign a 1-year deal for the rest of his career. So that really opens the door up for pretty much anybody. And anyone that wants to sign him could say, hey, yeah, we'll throw $40 million at you for a year, see what you can do. And if you can take us far, then maybe we can work out a longer deal or whatever might happen. But it was the first Cy Young win for a Reds pitcher ever. So he's the first ever Reds pitcher to ever win the Cy Young. And he had an incredible postseason, not to mention. He went 7 or more innings, struck out 12. I don't think he walked anybody, and he only gave up 1 hit. He was unbelievable in the postseason. The Braves looked like they had forgotten how to hit when they went up against Trevor Bauer. And I was actually very impressed with how the Reds really held themselves in that game, and mainly it was because of Trevor Bauer. He kept them in that ball game, and that is how much of a difference maker he is. Even if the bats aren't going for the team, he can at least come out and move through innings efficiently and minimize as much offensive damage by the other team. And he could really find himself on a contending team. I think a lot of teams are going to be very intrigued to see how he fits into a larger market and how he could come around and, possibly now on a lot of these teams that are talking about adding him and talking about signing him, in some cases he might be the 2 option. He won't be the 1 option. But if he's the 2 option, what does that mean the 1 option would be, right? Perfect example would be the Boston Red Sox. Chris Sale is obviously the number 1 option for them. Trevor Bauer comes in, he'd probably be a very high 2 option. Maybe he would try and take that 1 option or, that 1 spot from Sale. But that's a perfect example of just an incredible 1-2 punch that if was on any rotation would be by far the best 1-2 punch in all of baseball. So really wherever he lands, I think he's going to be a very, very, very big difference maker, and I think he's going to have a massive impact no matter what. But he's really solidified himself as one of the best pitchers in the league, as well as one of the best free agents right now. So in addition to the Cy Young winners, there were also the MVPs in each league. I want to run through those in the winners, with Freddie Freeman winning in the NL and Jose Abreu winning in the AL. 2 incredibly deserving players without question. I honestly was not shocked about Abreu at all. That was just my personal opinion. I thought that he, very similar to Shane Bieber, had that one in the bag. It was kind of an obvious decision in my opinion. But in the NL with Freddie Freeman, he was unstoppable from the plate himself. He was really good all year long. Most of the year, I should say, because there was a little bit of a down period for him where he was not hitting very well. But then, he really started playing well, and he didn't look back. He batted .341 with 13 homers and 53 RBIs, and he led the league in doubles with 23. Not to mention a whopping 1.102 OPS. Freeman was on an absolute roll the entire year. He also batted above 600, or he had a higher than 600 slugging percentage, and him and Ozuna, they really, I think, carried the load for this Braves team. And if you look at their team from last year to this year, obviously the difference is having Ozuna in the lineup. And I think that was kind of what pushed them over the edge in order to make that run that they did in the playoffs. But Freeman has been doing this for years. And I think he's now just starting to get recognized for it. I mean, he's obviously been an all-star, Silver Slugger, Gold Glover. He's done it all. Now he can check off an MVP, and he's just waiting for that World Series. And honestly, if they are able to keep Ozuna around and Freeman has the year that he had this year, next year, they could find themselves back in a very similar situation that they were in not too long ago in the end of October, just about. And, I mean, not to mention some other stats that he was really high up in the league for. He was first in runs created. He was second in OPS plus in the NL. I mean, he's been incredible his entire career, and I think it really just culminated in this MVP win this year in this 2020 season. A very odd year, but obviously for Freddie Freeman, it was not that weird of a year. So congratulations to Freddie Freeman on a huge win. And then over in the AL, Jose Abreu, I mean, again, no shock to me at all. The guy had 60 RBIs, and he had 19 homers. He had the most RBIs in the league, and he had the second most homers in the league this year, right behind Luke Voit of the Yankees, not to mention an AL-high .617 slugging percentage, and he had a .987 OPS and a .166 OPS plus, and a league-high 148 total bases. Abreu is a clear-cut a winner in this award for me. I really don't see how anybody else could have possibly won that. I mean, maybe DJ LeMahieu, maybe, but Abreu's numbers across the board were just leaps and bounds better than I think everybody else. And he had a lot of help, like Freeman did with Ozuna. Abreu had a ton of help with Jimenez. Eloy Jimenez was a great second option, and in all honesty, I think that's why these guys were able to, and it's kind of just a correlation I drew between the two. Both guys were the main front men in their lineup and in their hitting. They were the main points of it. They were the best hitters in their lineup. But Ozuna and Jimenez, for their respective teams, they were great second options, which I feel took some of the attention away from Freeman and from Abreu, because now pitchers were having to pay attention to Eloy Jimenez. They were having to pay attention to Marcell Ozuna. They couldn't just focus all of their attention on Freddie Freeman or on Jose Abreu. They had to take into account that there's other dangerous hitters in the lineup, and we have to be conservative, or we have to be a little bit careful with how we pitch some of these guys, because if not, it's not just Freddie Freeman or Jose Abreu that's going to be doing damage. It could be Eloy Jimenez or Marcell Ozuna doing damage. So I think that really added to their incredible years this year, having those second options and really kind of those, I don't want to say Batman and Robin kind of ordeal where it's the superhero and the sidekick, but that's kind of what it was. They were able to have the attention taken off of them a little bit, and as a result, they flourished in this year. I mean, they were incredible. And Jimenez was one of the best power hitters in baseball, not to mention Ozuna was one of the best power hitters in baseball. He led the NL in home runs and in RBIs. So both of them really, I think, gave their teammates a nice added boost that they really need. And, not to mention, Abreu had a 2.8 WAR. He hit .317, and his extra base percentage was a career high. And he had 3 points higher from last year, so he really dominated this year. I mean, he really, really dominated. No question he was an MVP candidate, and no question he should have won the MVP, which he did. So, again, very impressive performances by these players, and really some historic performances by some of them. But there's been some other news going around the MLB, that is that the Yankees are apparently open to trading Gary Sanchez. I find this incredibly intriguing, and here is why. Gary Sanchez, from about 2017 to 2019, was arguably one of the best hitting catchers. I mean, he had 30-plus homers in 2017 and in 2019. He was a two-time All-Star. He did have a career-low season this past year. So I think what they're looking at is this. Gary Sanchez has shown that he is capable of being a very good player at times. So, as a result, he has value in trade. And then when you kind of factor in he didn't have a great year, maybe that could even give them a little bit more incentive and say, hey, we're fine with unloading Sanchez. We'll give him to some team that might need him and is going to need that power hitting and, a catcher that could potentially hit 30-plus home runs. We could get something in return, and we could maybe go after JT Realmuto, which brings me up into my next point. If they're willing to trade Sanchez, that really makes me wonder what they're going to do about JT Realmuto. And I know that the New York Mets have been a very, very highly talked about destination for Realmuto. Well, if the Yankees get to him first, that's definitely going to rub the Mets the wrong way. So I think it's going to be kind of a race in New York. Who can get to Realmuto first? But the Yankees are going to really have to do something to unload Gary Sanchez. I mean, he had a massive drop in numbers from 2019 to 2020. I mean, it was a clear drop. And again, that might affect his trade value. He does, I think, have trade value, though, because he has shown that he's capable of being a good baseball player. But he also did not make a very good case for himself this past season going into this free agent offseason. Now, he's not a free agent because, again, he's still on contract, but if he's able to land on a team, or if they're able to get something out of this trade, that if this were to happen, again, that could really open up the doors for JT Realmuto to come in, who is a better fielding catcher than Gary Sanchez is. He's a little bit younger than Gary Sanchez is, and I think that JT Realmuto is much more consistent as a hitter across the board than Gary Sanchez. Gary Sanchez, sure, he's got great pop in his bat, but that doesn't necessarily translate into being a consistent hitter that is able to drive in runs and runs and runs. Now, where could Sanchez go? That kind of brings me into another point. What are some options for the Yankees? Where could they trade him? Well, a couple places, and I'm going to get into some of these teams later on when I talk about JT Realmuto, but maybe the Cardinals. I know that the Cardinals were a team that had made a lot of at least rumors or possible kind of hints at maybe getting rid of Yadier Molina. I mean, again, he's one of the greatest catchers of our generation, I think, one of the best catchers in the last 20 years, and he is getting older. His numbers are declining. His production is declining. So maybe they ship, Gary Sanchez over to the Yankees. I don't know what they would do about Yadier Molina. Maybe they'd say, hey, we don't want Yadier. Maybe, Yadier Molina goes somewhere else, and he's traded somewhere else, and that kind of opens the door for Sanchez to come. Another team, maybe the Nationals. I know that Kurt Suzuki is on, he's actually a free agent this year. And then Yan Gomes, he actually had a very good year this past season. Not as good as, or a much better year than he had in 2019, which definitely, I think, made a case for him to be kind of the main catcher, the main backstop for the Nationals. But Gary Sanchez could be a nice add for them, some good home run hitting, some good power hitting, and I think it would really complement Soto and Trey Turner. Other teams, maybe the Indians they could trade for, maybe the Angels. But I just think that Sanchez at some point does need to go out of New York, because I think that he's more of a detriment to them than anything. And bringing in JT Realmuto, I think, would just have a better fit across the board. But who knows what's going to happen with that. I'll be sure to keep my eye on that and keep you all updated on that one. But then there were also some pitchers. I want to get into back in the free agency stuff a little bit. I know I'm kind of jumping around, but there's been some players that have actually decided to accept their qualifying offers for their respective teams. Marcus Stroman actually accepted his with the Mets. Kevin Gausman accepted his with the Giants. And Gausman actually was a very highly talked about free agent for this upcoming offseason. A lot of people had him on their radar and were really interested in him. So a great find for the Giants, and really a great job by them to keep him around. He had a solid 3-3 record. He had 79 Ks. He had above a 3.5 ERA, so he wasn't a ginormous, huge superstar, but he was definitely a nice, solid fit for the Giants that I think if they can keep some of these other pieces that they had around this past season, because they really, towards the end of the season, they really kind of stepped on the gas a little bit, and I think they started to pick up the pace just a tad, and I think they just needed kind of a year or two to maybe play together, get down with the chemistry, and kind of get into a rhythm a little bit with playing amongst each other. And now that they're able to do that, I think going into next year, they're able to keep some of these guys around. They're able to keep some of these pieces. I think it's going to be a really, really good year for the Giants. And then for Stroman, I think it was a great move for the Mets to keep him around. I mean, they were probably in fear of losing him as a pitcher. They already had to deal with possibly losing Porcello and Wacha, which I believe, somebody would have to double-check me on this, but I believe Michael Wacha and Ricky Porcello both accepted their qualifying offers, or at least have been offered it. So I have no idea what is kind of transpiring with that. But you have Stroman, you've got DeGrom, and then Noah Syndergaard is out for 2021 with an injury. But once he comes back, and if you're able to keep Stroman around for a longer period of time, I think you're going to have a serious, three-man tandem in New York with the Mets. I mean, that's a very heavy, first three front rotation for starting pitchers. So both teams, I think, were making very smart moves, and I think the Mets are going to become kind of a sneaky team in this offseason that's going to make some moves. I don't know about the Giants, but I could definitely see the Mets starting to make some moves. But there are also some other players that actually rejected their qualifying offers. Trevor Bauer, obviously, DJ LeMahieu, JT Realmuto, George Springer. All of them rejected them, so now they are officially free agents, or at least until one of those players, their respective teams that they were on this past season, brings in an offer that at least intrigues them. But I think that for the most part, all four were very fair to reject those qualifying offers. Trevor Bauer, no question, because I think he knows that he's going to get paid a large amount of money. Same thing with DJ LeMahieu, although I'm kind of shocked he said no to the Yankees, because it's kind of hard to say no to the Yankees. But I think he also sees that they've been good. They've got this serious lineup. They've got kind of this present-day murderer's row with all of these hitters that they've got. But it's not really translating into anything. And then JT Realmuto, kind of the same thing. I think that him rejecting his from the Phillies was a smart move because I do think that he could find himself on a better team. Now, George Springer is an interesting case. I think that he could have either stayed with the qualifying offer or he could do what he did and just reject it. I think he's going to be a very highly sought-after free agent because I know for many teams, at least what I've seen, the outfield seems to kind of be a lot of teams' openings. A lot of teams have, whether it's a left field that they don't have or a center field or a right field, whatever it might be, there's a lot of holes in a lot of these teams' outfield. So outfield free agents might be some of the most highly sought after and highly, interesting or popular kind of free agents this offseason just because of all of the different openings that there are on so many teams with their outfields kind of, in some cases being a little bit of slim pickings, if you will. So I think that all four were very fair to do that, and I think that, no matter what, they're going to land on all good teams and they're going to get paid large amounts of money because all four have proven to be some of the better players in baseball. So a lot of things are going on with free agency. I know we started with some award talk, we got into some trades, free agency, and everything else. A lot of things going on in this baseball world. I think that it's almost kind of the calm before the storm. Everybody is, at least I think, everybody's kind of waiting and seeing when this all is going to come around and is really going to all just, one day you get a notification and then all of a sudden these free agents are just starting to sign. Trevor Bauer, DJ LeMahieu, JT, there's going to be a lot of new faces on new places this year, which I think will be very fun for 2021. But now I want to briefly mention some other very exciting latest news in the baseball world, and that is the recent hiring of Kim Ng for the Miami Marlins. She was just recently hired as their GM, and she's actually now the first woman and first Asian American to hold the position of a general manager at the major league level. So congratulations to Kim. I've read a lot of articles about her, and everything that I have ever read or heard is nothing but positive. She is a very, very, very successful woman in baseball. She's actually had an extensive career in baseball, actually being around with 21 different front offices. She was with the White Sox from 1990 to 1996. Then she was with the Yankees from 1998 to 2001, with the Dodgers from 2002 to 2011. And she's really, she spent almost a decade in MLB's central office, mostly holding a lot of roles as, MLB's senior vice president of baseball and softball development. So she's had an extensive resume and an extensive history in baseball. And I think that's it's such a great thing to see that there are these women and that there are these figures in sports that are becoming pioneers, and they're really changing the way sports are and are kind of viewed by the everyday viewer. And now we can see that a woman can become a GM, and now she's also showing and becoming that role model for, younger girls and a younger generation, saying, hey, it's okay if, this is a sport where only guys are playing. It's still okay for a woman to be a part of, and she can still be very successful, and she can still be a part of something very special in baseball. So I think that it was just an incredible move for the Marlins. I think that a lot of exciting things are on the horizon for them, and I wish, Kim Ng all the luck in the world. I think that she's going to be a fantastic fit for the Marlins, and I'm really excited to see how Miami turns out. A lot of promising things from this past season. A lot of people, at least that I've talked to, have all agreed that they were a very surprising team. And who knows? She could really make some huge move this offseason, and this could be kind of the beginning of a new era for the Marlins. And I think that she's a great hire for them. Again, a lot of experience in the MLB level and in the MLB world in general. And I'm excited to just see kind of which transpires and kind of goes from here for the Marlins. So a lot of exciting things going on in the baseball world. A lot of great news, just flying them around. But that'll do it for us in this first segment. But stay right there, folks, because after the commercial, I'll discuss which free agent that is going to be highly sought after is actually the more valuable, JT Realmuto or Trevor Bauer. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I hopped into discussing some of the latest news going around the league and discussing some of the latest developments in free agency. Be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show as I will rank my best free agents on the market right now and which players are at the top of the list for probably just about every team. I want to now debate on which free agent is more valuable to teams, JT Realmuto or Trevor Bauer. Now, as we know, both free agents have been highly talked about since they both have rejected their qualifying offers from their respective teams, and they can really help boost any team's roster, in my opinion. Some obviously more than others, but I want to discuss who's more valuable. Both players have been some of the best at their respective positions in the last few years, and they clearly are going to make a huge splash wherever they land in free agency. Bauer struggled initially when he first got to Cincy. Very different from Realmuto, who, when he arrived in Philly in 2019, he was an all-star. So it did take Bauer a little bit to adjust, which for teams that are going after him, is that something that maybe you should pay attention to? Mainly because the increase in his ERA from when he left Cleveland and came to Cincinnati, it nearly doubled. Like I mentioned in the first segment, it went from 3.79 when he was in Cleveland prior to being traded, all the way up to a 6.39, so a big decline in pitching. But that drastically changed this year with a career low in ERA, so that might have just been a formality for Bauer. You know, I mean, last year seemed to kind of be a little bit of a rough year for him in terms of how he left Cleveland, how he arrived in Cincinnati, everything else. So, but that does have to be something that teams are paying attention to. Realmuto has put up back-to-back years where he had 20-plus homers and 70-plus RBIs, which as a catcher, I mean, that's pretty impressive to do. Not to mention he batted .270 or higher for 4 straight years, batting .303 in 2016, which is a career high for him. And many believe that Realmuto is now the best catcher in baseball, and he has the defense to prove it. I mean, he's led the MLB in caught stealing percentage in 2019, with 47% of his runners being caught when they were trying to steal on him, and he only had 1 passed ball all year. So the hitting and the fielding combined into one is making Realmuto an even more likely target for just about any teams. And I think that it really is going to come down to who is going to have the bigger kind of, who's going to land on the team that fits better for them, right? I think a lot of teams are going to need a catcher because JT Realmuto, you can always go out and find really good starting pitching, I feel. I feel like even though it is still very challenging to find solid starting pitching, it is even more challenging to find solid catching like you do with, I mean, JT Realmuto is a perfect example of somebody who I think comes far and few between, very infrequently. And he's shown that he's a very, very talented hitter. Not to mention, I mean, his OPS plus numbers are very solid. In 2018, he batted 126 as an OPS plus. This past year, he batted 123. Now, he didn't have a stellar season this year. He did have 11 homers and 32 RBIs. So a solid year nonetheless, but nothing insane, right? Nothing just catastrophic. But at the same time, he did have a career high in OPS at 840. He actually jumped up 20 points from his OPS in 2019 to 2020. So that is, again, something to maybe take into account, that he's able to put up power numbers as a catcher. And again, as a catcher, you're not seeing many guys that are great hitters. There's very few catchers. They always say that if you've got a really good hitting catcher, you're doing something right. And not to mention, again, he's got the defense. I mean, he had the most assists as a catcher in 2016 with 80. So he clearly has been able to be a huge part defensively. He's actually been first in the NL in double plays turned as a catcher on numerous occasions in 2016, 2019, and 2020. So, I mean, it's very easy to kind of figure out these numbers and these statistics that he has. Mainly that he's a great hitter, but he's got an even better fielding track record, which, again, a lot of catchers, you start to see that it's either really good hitting or it's really good, fielding. It's never both. And he's really able to kind of incorporate both. Now, for Trevor Bauer, kind of the same deal, right? He's very few pitchers are pitching at the level that he is. But at the same time, you can still find really good pitchers out there. There's more really good pitchers, I think, than there are really good catchers. And Trevor Bauer, again, coming off of last year, he was really riding a low wave. I mean, he was having a 6.39 ERA after 2019, and then coming into this year, a 1.73 ERA, that's a 5 ERA difference just about. And he's 29 years old, so he's right in the perfect peak of time for him to really land on a really good team, and I think that he could land on a contender. I think that he could become a player that could be a massive difference maker for just about any team. Not to mention, what I love about Bauer is his ability to go the distance. He's able to go really far into the game. I mean, 9 of his 11 starts this year were quality starts. He led the entire league in complete games and in shutouts. So his efficiency is through the roof. And not to mention, he only had 17 walks and 100 strikeouts. So that's telling you something right there. I mean, he's had many years where he's had over 200 strikeouts. In 2019, he had 253. 2018, he had 221. So the strikeouts come with ease for him. And not to mention, again, the innings also do, too. He did have only 73 innings pitched this year as compared to some other guys that had upwards of 80, if not 90 innings pitched. But if you think about it, only really, I would say, again, 3 guys, Bauer, DeGrom, and Bieber, had the rate of strikeouts compared to the amount of innings pitched that Bauer did. I think that, again, Bauer had 100 strikeouts and 73 innings. DeGrom had 104 strikeouts in about 68 innings. And I'm not quite sure what Shane Bieber's innings numbers were, but 122 Ks and let's just round it to about 70 or 80 innings. That's all very, very efficient and very, very incredible that they were able to move through innings like that. Not to mention, Bauer had a 0.795 whip, which was the NL high this past season. So he's really good at keeping guys off the base path and getting out of innings quickly and efficiently. But my question is, again, this. Realmuto, we never hear about any sort of off-the-field issues. And I'm not saying that Bauer has any off-the-field issues. But what he does bring is extra drama, in my opinion. He's very vocal on social media. He's very outspoken about that. He's been outspoken this entire offseason and this entire free agency period, saying, I'm open to going anywhere. He kind of throws hints at certain teams and throws hints at other teams. He's kind of all over the place. And then again, I go back to his instance in Cleveland, kind of one of, I think, the straws that broke the camel's back, in my opinion, was when Terry Francona's coming out to take him out. He gets angry, he turns around, and just chucks the ball into center field. That's not, I don't think, something that a lot of teams, I think the character aspect of it is going to come into effect. I think you have to look at it from that angle and say, okay, is he going to, character-wise and personality-wise, fit this team? And if not, then we should probably stay away from him. But again, his talent really, I think, outweighs a lot of this. He's got such great ability as a pitcher. I mean, he's got great speed on his fastball. And his fastball, I mean, it moves. It can tail in on you and it can tail away. He's got a lot of different kind of, pitches in his arsenal. He's got a great repertoire. And I think that at the end of the day, no matter where he lands, again, he's going to be a massive add. He's going to be a huge impact. It's just going to be whether or not he lands on a contending team or not. Because, again, I think that if he's okay with signing one-year deals, he's open to going anywhere. So that means he could go from anywhere between Boston to the Texas Rangers, right? A team that is not a contender at all. And if that's the case, if he lands on a non-contending team, I feel like he's just wasting his time. Now, JT Realmuto, again, he's kind of a different situation, mainly because I think that Realmuto, he really brings a little bit of again, not as much off-the-field issues as Trevor Bauer does. But in addition to all of that, JT Realmuto can also DH. So what that could mean is this. You could sign Realmuto to a really long deal, say, I don't know, maybe 8 years. An 8-year deal, he's 29 years old right now. Roughly, you'd say around 37, he'll probably start plateauing a little bit and start declining a little bit. At least kind of that's around the time when Yadier Molina has started to decline. But I think that if you bring in him as a catcher and then eventually he can turn into a DH, I think that's going to intrigue teams even more. I mean, this past year he only played 9 games at DH, and he played 6 games at first base, and he played 36 at catcher. So he's clearly a catcher, right? He's clearly, first and foremost, a catcher, but he has the ability to be moved around in the field. And I think it's going to be very intriguing to see if he stays in the NL or not. He's been an NL player his entire career. Could he maybe say, okay, I want to go over to the AL. I know that as time goes on, my legs and knees are going to give out from catching, but I'm still a very good hitter. I would like to at least continue that trend. Where could I become, a DH? Where could I land for that? I can't really think of any AL teams right off the bat that could use him. I will say, though, if you look at a team like, say, the Cleveland Indians, okay, they've really struggled in recent years with the catching position, And not to mention, the DH is kind of non-existent for them as well. So if you go ahead and say, all right, we'll sign you to a huge deal. Now, here's the other thing with the Indians, though. They've said they wanted to keep their money, pretty tight this year. That's why they've talked about trading Francisco Lindor. So as a result, kind of makes you question, all right, which team is going to be willing to pay who? Now, if somebody were to ask me who do I think is going to get paid more, it's going to be Bauer, no question. In my opinion, I think Bauer is going to be more demanding of money. Bauer at least has seemed to really want a lot of money. I mean, so does JT Realmuto. They've both rejected qualifying offers of $18.9 million. And I think what stinks for the Phillies is that if they lose him, and then if they lose Didi Gregorius, who's also a free agent, that could really open up some holes in their infield, and that could really pose some problems. I don't think that he would ever, honestly, I don't think either one of them are going to re-sign with the teams that they were on this past year, mainly because I think that they are looking for something bigger and better. I think that Bauer, if he stuck it out with Cincinnati, they could maybe make a little bit of a run 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 times. They would have a very short, finite window before Mike Moustakas would start saying, okay, I want out. Same thing with Nick Castellanos, and then all of a sudden Trevor Bauer falls in suit, and then who knows what happens with Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray. And then kind of the same thing with JT Realmuto, except he's more so, I think that if the Phillies were to keep him and if he were to stick around, they would maybe make a little bit of a better run. I think that they've got a little bit more depth than the Reds do in terms of at least hitting. But I just still think that those are two teams that aren't really, I think, advancing very far into baseball or really into the playoffs at all, especially just with, I think, the personnel that they have and just how they've come up short a couple times. But I think that both are very, very, very important and very sought-after free agents. They're going to be very popular free agents, and people are going to want them. People are clearly going to want to try and snag JT Realmuto because he's kind of a hidden gem with his ability as a catcher. I mean, he's easily the best catcher in baseball, in my opinion, right now. But I think that Bauer, the same thing, people see how good he is. I mean, I've seen a lot of things with him possibly landing in L.A. because he's an L.A. native and he's originally from Los Angeles. He also went to UCLA. I've seen things that he could maybe land in New York with the Yankees, but I've also heard that apparently him and Garrett Cole were teammates at UCLA, and I guess they had kind of a falling out and they don't really get along, although Trevor Bauer did say that he is okay with Garrett Cole and there's no hard feelings anymore. That was years ago. It's in the past, whatever. But you also kind of have to factor that in, too. Trevor Bauer's personality definitely is being looked at, I think, very heavily by a lot of these teams, and I think they're all taking into consideration, if we bring Trevor Bauer on, what are the additives that we have to worry about? What is the off-field issues that we're going to have to be concerned with that could have some sort of impact on our team, on the fan base, on whatever it might be? Not to mention, I think the danger with Trevor Bauer is him wanting to sign one-year deals. I think it's very good for him, but at the same time, it's not. Because I think that when you're somebody that is that good of a player, you don't want to necessarily sign one-year deals constantly. Sure, you can negotiate how much money you want to make on a yearly basis, but if you have a string of 2 or 3 years that are not very good, teams are going to start getting the idea that you're kind of starting to decline, and they're not going to want to sign you to one-year deals that are astronomically high. They're not going to want to waste $35 million in a year for a guy to have a 6-12 record and a 5.5 ERA. They're not going to want to pay for that. So I think that a lot of these teams have to be very careful with how they go about offering contracts to Trevor Bauer. I think that there's a little bit more risk with Bauer, but I think the reward is greater for him because I will say, although Realmuto is a very, very talented baseball player, I don't know if he's got the impact that Bauer could have, where if he lands on the team, it's going to be an immediate change and it's going to be very, very noticeable. With the Reds, perfect instance. He comes on, this is his first full year with the Reds, well, kind of full year with the Reds, and they go to the playoffs for the first time since 2013, 2014. So he's got that kind of effect. He's got that ability that he can come in and he can completely change where the direction in which the team is going. And that is what is so intriguing about Bauer, in my opinion. But JT Realmuto, I think that you're going to get more out of your dollar if you go in on JT Realmuto, because you could get him for a long period of time, and you know that he's going to be consistent for a long period of time too. I mean, if you look at his numbers from the last couple years, right? I mean, they're pretty steady, I would say. In 2019, he batted 275, 2018, 277, 2017, 278, 2016, 303. So you're getting a catcher that's going to be 270 to 300 hitter, and he's able to drive in, in those 3-4 years, he was driving in anywhere between 40 and 80 RBIs. And then not to mention he's throwing in a couple years with 20-plus homers. So you've got a guy that is able to do a lot of different things, and that could potentially stretch over a longer period of time. With Trevor Bauer, you might get a good year out of him, but then if he's going to want to continue to sign a one-year deal, and it's not really kind of what you had hoped or what you had expected him to perform, then he's going to start losing money. So I think that if he's smart, he goes in with a long-term deal so that he doesn't have to worry about, okay, if I have one bad year, that's going to completely mess me up for the rest of my career. If I got one bad year, I'm still on contract, still making the same amount of money, and I cannot worry about it. I can just move on to the next year. So in all honesty, the player that I think has a little bit more value, in my opinion, I would probably have to say Bauer definitely has to be the more valuable one, simply with the impact that he had on the Reds in just one season. That just shows how much of a difference maker he has and what kind of difference he brings onto the diamond. But I think, really either one of them are huge difference makers. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot more risk with Bauer. There's a lot more risk with him. And if you want to play it safe and you want to be consistent and you don't want to have to worry about going out and getting a new catcher for 6-7 years, I would go after Realmuto because that is harder to find than a really good starting pitcher. They're kind of, I don't want to say disposable, but you can go out and find a guy that had a really good year the year before and he's a free agent that season, and then all of a sudden you bring him on. Whereas a catcher, they're far and few between. I mean, there's slim pickings on how many really good catchers there are. I mean, really good catchers, not just kind of average catchers, like really, really good catchers. So Bauer, I think, clearly is the more valuable one, but I think that he is definitely more of a risk, and I think that Realmuto is a safer option and is probably going to get a team more for their money than what Bauer is going to, especially if Bauer wants to do this one-year contract thing, which I think is kind of ridiculous in my opinion, but again, who knows? He probably has a reason for it. So that'll close things out here for us in our second segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the break, I'm going to continue this conversation with Realmuto and discuss which teams I could see the standout catcher landing on in this year's offseason. It's been a lot of fun so far, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel, folks. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and in the last segment I got right into discussing which player is more valuable of a free agent, JT Realmuto or Trevor Bauer. And in this third segment, I want to keep that conversation going about JT Realmuto as I'm going to now discuss which teams are probably the best suitors for the talented backstop catcher. Realmuto, I mean, he's had a great career, and he's under 30. He's right at 29 years old, so not crazy old. And he's been one of the best catchers in baseball in the last few years. He's been an all-star twice and a gold glover, so he brings a bit of both with hitting and fielding, and I think that's going to be the attraction that a lot of teams are going to see in Realmuto. He's got a solid bat, as he had 11 homers and 32 RBIs in 2020, and he was coming off back-to-back 20-plus home run seasons in the previous 2 years. Realmuto also led the MLB in caught stealing percentage in 2019, so he's got a lot of aspects to him that teams will be very intrigued by. So I want to run through who these teams are that he will probably most likely fit the best on. The first one is the New York Yankees. This would be a perfect team for him, mainly because of the poor bat that Sanchez showed in the 2020 season, the slowness he possesses as a catcher and a runner, and the poor defensive capabilities he possesses. I also think if they do wind up trading Sanchez, which is a rumor that has been going around, I think it would potentially open the door for Realmuto to slide right into that position, not to mention they could be freeing up some salary if LeMahieu doesn't re-sign, which right now that doesn't look very likely. So if Realmuto comes, the Yankees are, pretty much filling that void of a starting catcher. And again, if Sanchez is dealt, and they'd have some solid hitting like LeMahieu, but Realmuto would bring much more power than LeMahieu would. I think that even though losing LeMahieu would be a big detriment to them, adding a JT Realmuto, I think is going to do them wonders in the long run. So that's one team I think that could definitely potentially be a landing spot for him. Now, the next team I think could also be a landing spot is the Atlanta Braves. Now, everyone is probably at home saying, why would they give up Darnell? Realmuto is better, but Darnell had a great year. Why would they go after him? Well, here's the thing. The Braves have a similar issue on their hands that the Yankees do, minus the up-and-down catcher that isn't a free agent. Instead, the Braves have Ozuna and Darnell as free agents this offseason, and the chances of Ozuna to sign are looking thinner and thinner, I feel. I might be wrong, but I think that the Braves are going to be in desperate need of a big bat in the lineup if Ozuna walks. And they'll especially need a good bat and a good catcher if Darnell goes somewhere and signs, because again, he's also a free agent. And I don't know if he's going to get a ginormous deal or not. I might be wrong, but I think that he's definitely going to get paid a substantial amount because he did have a very good year this past season. This Braves team was one of the best hitting teams in baseball, with the second most team home runs and the most team RBIs. And for a guy that had 11 dingers with 32 RBIs, and he's been able to showcase an ability to hit the long ball and hit for power, all while being a catcher, I think this is a match made in heaven for the Braves. Now, the best case scenario would be maybe, and that is a big maybe, that if Darnell walks and they are able to keep Ozuna and somehow, some way sign Realmuto, wow, that would be a scary team without question. Not to mention, Realmuto is a way better defensive catcher than Darnell is. Darnell is one of the kind of latter half defensive catchers in the MLB, not a great backstop catcher, and as a result, a team like Atlanta, who was right on the cusp of making the World Series, they're going to look to see somebody, or at least try and find somebody that can definitely anchor that defense right at home plate, but also bring in a bat for their lineup, because their lineup is starting to grow a little bit. So I think the Atlanta Braves would be a very interesting, landing spot for him, a very interesting destination, and I think that it could, in the long run, really pay dividends for Atlanta. Now, the next team, and again, this is probably the most talked about suitor for JT Realmuto, and that's the New York Mets. I mean, plain and simple, they can afford him, and they want to have him back behind the plate. And quite frankly, I think they would be a great team with him. Wilson Ramos had a down year this past season and could be experiencing kind of the beginning of the end of his career, with his lowest batting average in 5 years this past season and a below 700 OPS this year. Not to mention he had an 88 OPS plus this past year, which is the lowest he's had since 2017 when he had a 97 OPS plus. So definitely on the back end of his career, and I think that the Mets are at least taking note of that, and they're paying attention to that. At least I hope they are. And I also think that with the simple fact that the Yankees have shown so much interest, or at least are considering showing interest in him, that the Mets may, they might want to go after him just so the Yankees can't get to him. The Mets have started to add some pieces back from this past season for next year, which, having Marcus Stroman accepting his qualifying offer was a ginormous step in the right direction for them. So clearly, that'll be, again, a piece that they can add, and not to mention having JT Realmuto there would be even better. And I believe that they are also working on qualifying offers for Porcello and Waka. So if they can get 4 of their 5 guys back, obviously Syndergaard out for the year in 2021, they could focus on hitting and position players as opposed to trying to figure out the pitching situation and potentially having to go after Bauer instead of Realmuto, because I know Bauer's name was really thrown out a lot with the New York Mets. And honestly, if they weren't able to re-sign, Stroman, if they weren't able to re-sign Porcello or Waka, I don't know what the situation is with that. I believe the last time I saw, Waka and Porcello were both offered qualifying offers. I don't know if they accepted them or not, but I think they did. Somebody would have to double-check me on that, obviously. But at the end of the day, if they can get 4 of their 5 guys back for their rotation, which if you think about it, between Michael Waka, Jacob deGrom, you got Marcus Stroman, and you've got Rick Porcello, those are 4 substantially good pitchers. Not to mention you've got a perennial Cy Young winner, and he's been a finalist the last 3 years, and he was the back-to-back winner in the Cy Young, and Jacob deGrom. So you would have definitely a very strong front rotation. now you can go after some hitting. You can add some more hitting. I mean, you already have Jeff McNeil, obviously. You've got Dominic Smith. You've got, Alonso. I mean, he's one of the best long ball hitters in all of baseball, setting the MLB rookie record for home runs in a season. So he's definitely going to be somebody that they are going to want to keep around. So if you bring in JT Realmuto, you can get rid of Ramos, or you can just have him as a backup, maybe even have him as kind of a veteran to maybe show Realmuto a thing or two. I mean, I don't think he really needs to be shown anything. He's clearly proven himself as one of the best, if not the best, catchers in baseball. So I think that having Realmuto in a Mets uniform would be a great idea. And I think that they could potentially, in terms of finances, they could really luck out having to not go after a guy like Trevor Bauer, who I think is going to be paid an astronomical amount of money. They can go after somebody like Realmuto, who will probably get paid very well, but is not going to get paid the level that a starting pitcher that just won the Cy Young is going to want. And I think that Bauer is definitely going to use that Cy Young win in his favor, which he should. So the Mets is another team that I think that would really benefit from having JT Realmuto around. Now the next team is the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, I picked this team because of the rumors that have gone around about Molina potentially being traded. Again, very similar to how Sanchez has got some rumors going around with him. Same thing with Molina. And that would really open the doors wide open for the Cardinals to try and go after a catcher. And they know they can still get some production out of Molina. I mean, he batted .262, but he had a .662 OPS, which was his lowest OPS in the last 4 years. And the last 3 years, you can see a decline in his numbers, as he's batted .270 or lower in the last 3 seasons, opposed to the 5 previous years before that, where he had 5 straight years of hitting .270 or better and hitting .300 or better in 2 of those years in the 5-year span. I know that was a lot to throw at all of you, but basically what that means is his numbers are declining. He's clearly on kind of a downturn in his career. So although those aren't terrible numbers right now, he's aging, and he's not going to get any younger. This would be very ideal for this Cardinals team to add a Realmuto, as the Cards were 22nd in batting average as a team, and they were 28th in the MLB in RBIs. So clearly could use a little bit of a dominating bat in their lineup, and not to mention Realmuto is really in the prime of his career, and he's going to want to spend that time with a storied team that has won. And sure, the other teams I've mentioned have been winners in the past and have some of the biggest, most historical kind of lineages and stories in baseball, with the Yankees and with the Mets and so on and so forth. The Cardinals could go all in on a player like Realmuto, whereas these other teams might not want to pay another player a very hefty salary like they are paying other guys, like the Yankees. I mean, they're paying so many guys so much money, they might not want to go after JT Realmuto in the long run just because they don't want to have to pay more money. This would be a good fit, I think, especially if Molina is on his way out potentially. The Cardinals, I think, could be a likely destination for him. But again, I think right now my front runner would be the Mets. And then my final team that I really think he could potentially make a big difference on, the Washington Nationals. Now, this might sound a little crazy for a team that doesn't really need another catcher, with Kurt Suzuki and Yan Gomes each having very good years this past season, batting above .270 each. So clearly they've got some hitting behind the plate. But what they could do is this. Suzuki and Gomes are 2 aging catchers that honestly have maybe a few years left in them, but nothing crazy. They could unload them or trade them, try to make some room for Realmuto and add him to the lineup. Now, they could maybe add him, then try to trade, Gomes, and Suzuki is a free agent. So there will be room behind the plate for the Nationals if Suzuki walks. So that would be one less catcher that they would have to worry about. And for a team that is only a few years removed from their World Series run, they may want to add some deeper hitting to their lineup, especially if they are seeing the ascension with Turner and Soto simultaneously. Then I think that adding Realmuto will only make things better for them. It'll also take the attention away from Turner and from Soto. I know I mentioned that earlier in the show, talking about adding these different pieces and how these kind of second best players on these teams are vital to these superstars and these best player on these teams, because then the attention is taken off of them a little bit, and pitchers are not going to have to focus so much of their game plan on that one main superstar. Now they've got another guy to worry about. So I think having Realmuto in that situation could take some pressure off of Soto, who I'm sure a lot of pitchers took note of this past season with how well he hit. Same thing with Turner. So I think that could be a very interesting, and not to mention, I mean, they had Pudge Rodriguez for a year or two, so many years ago, but I don't think they've really, and they did have Matt Wieters for a little bit, but he was on the end of his career. It wasn't like he was with the Orioles. So I think having a very solid catcher behind the dish for the Nationals would be very ideal. I mean, this is a team that can also financially afford him, but you have to remember that they are paying some very high, salaries, huge name salaries, and like Strasburg and Scherzer, which could pose an issue, mainly because Realmuto is definitely going to want to make his money without question, and if the Nats can't pay, well, he most likely won't play. So if he's able to somehow, some way find himself in a Washington Nationals uniform, I think that they would be a very good fit for him, especially with kind of the potential opening in the catcher position right now. But again, there's some other teams that could maybe use him. The Astros, they could definitely use a very good catcher. Martin Maldonado had a terrible year, batted .215 on the season, very, very poor season, so he would be a great fit for them. Not to mention, if Springer and Brantley are gone because of free agency, that's definitely going to open the doors for somebody to come into Houston and potentially try and continue on the winning trend that they've had. Milwaukee wouldn't be another. They would probably be a very interesting one because Omar Narvaez had a terrible year. I think he batted under 200 for the entire season. He was dismal as a hitter. So I think he could be another potential kind of. Or at least another, the Brewers could be another potential team that Realmuto could maybe land on. I'm trying to think of some other teams. Maybe the Rockies. The Rockies are always a team that would be very interesting to see if he would wind up on. But some of these other teams like the Rays or the Athletics that are contending teams probably are not going to be able to secure Realmuto just because of how much money he's going to want. And in the long run, I think that could maybe benefit them a little bit because, again, catchers you don't really know because their position is you're constantly down in a crouch. You're constantly so much wear and tear on your knees. So having a long, tenured catcher, I feel like is not really a common thing anymore. But I will say what's interesting about the Athletics and the Rays is that they are in the AL. And that, again, I brought this point up, earlier in the show, saying that Realmuto has had experience as a DH. So that could maybe open up a possibility for him to go to the AL. Although he's never been in the AL, he's only played in the NL. What could that mean for, his career in the long run? Could he maybe say, okay, I'm looking at my career 10 years down the road and not really 2 years down the road, and in 10 years, I'm definitely not going to be behind the dish. I'm going to probably be a DH. So why don't I make my way onto an AL team, sign a long-term deal, and be in the AL for the rest of my career, and I don't have to worry about catching once my knees go. I can just, and not being able to hit and being in the lineup. I can now just focus solely on hitting, and I can make a complete and different career switch out of that, as we've seen a lot of guys do, especially someone like Nelson Cruz, or, who's clearly has lost a lot of fielding ability over the years, but his hitting seems to just get better and better. Realmuto could have that same effect. So ultimately, wherever he lands, he's going to be a huge addition, but I'm just really excited to hear where he goes because it's going to be a groundbreaking announcement, I think. Same thing with Bauer. Social media is going to crash that day. People are going to be posting and tweeting and commenting so much about it. It's going to be an absolute pandemonium. But I'm very excited to see where they're going to wind up and just to, get 2021 season going and seeing where all these new faces are going to be in all these new places. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. Stay right there, though, because we'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I will rank my best free agents in the offseason. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the previous segment I jumped into discussing the teams that would be the best fit for another highly sought-after free agent, JT Realmuto, and I want to stick with that free agent talk in our last segment today, as I will rank my best free agents in baseball right now for this offseason. So I want to kick it off with number 10, and this might be an unlikely name to hear in a top 10 for the free agents, but when I mention the numbers he's put up the last 2 years, you might have a change of mind, and that's Liam Hendriks. I think Hendricks for the Athletics is going to be a guy that will try to get big-time money, but I don't think he'll get huge money, which is why he's probably going to be a very popular free agent to go after, since he could be a low-cost but incredibly effective. So I think that's definitely going to pique a lot of teams' interest. He's been one of the top relievers in baseball the last few years. This past year, he was sensational, posting a 1.78 ERA with a 3-1 record, a 0.67 WHIP, and 37 Ks, all in 25 1/3 innings. And he's had a sub-2 ERA each of the last 2 seasons, and in 2019, he posted his career high in strikeouts with 124, and not to mention only 21 walks. So his K-to-walk ratio is insane, and for a reliever, that is a very, very exciting statistic to show and to have, especially if you're going into the free agent market. And he's pretty much been untouchable against hitters as well. With the last 2 years, his average against being 201 or lower. This past year, it was 161, and then in 2019, it was 201. So again, guys are really struggling to hit off of Hendricks. And now, over his career, he's seen some struggles. I will say it. If you look at his numbers and throughout his career, they haven't been great, but it seems that those days are behind him, and he is showing how strong of a pitcher he can be and could potentially land on a contending team. I really think that a lot of contenders in the MLB would be ecstatic to pick up a relief guy like this, because I think that, again, it's low cost and high reward, and I think that's exactly what you want out of a guy like Liam Hendricks. And not to mention, again, his numbers the last 2 years have been sensational. They have been unbelievable. So if you take that into consideration and look at some of the teams that are going to need relief guys, I think that Hendricks is going to surprise a lot of people in where he's going to land and maybe how much money he'll make. Number 9, Justin Turner. And yes, I know, he's getting a little older. He is 35, 36, but Turner has clearly been a major piece to this Dodgers team for quite some time now. And if he leaves L.A., he's going to be a major impact, really, and I think really anywhere he lands, because he's just got that factor of not only, his ability, but he's also a veteran, and he's been in big-time pivotal games and pivotal moments in his baseball career. I mean, he put on a show in the World Series this past year, and he showed his ability to not only be a talented player, but again, be a needed leader, a great leader. A lot of the guys on the Dodgers always mention that, Justin Turner, he was essentially their heart and soul of their team. He's been on the Dodgers since 2014. He'd been through all the ups and downs that they had experienced over the last few years, and he stuck right with the team the entire way. So he's going to be a veteran that I think if you put him on a team that's got a lot of young guys, they're going to look up to him, and they're going to learn a lot from somebody that has been he's really been around the block in the MLB. He's been sensational since he joined the Dodgers, too. I mean, his batting average dipped below 290 only one time between 2014 and 2020, the years that he's been with the Dodgers. And this past year, he batted over 300 for the 4th time in his entire tenure with the Dodgers. So 4 out of those 6-7 years, he's batting over 300, and there's only one of those 6-7 years that he's batted lower than 290. That should tell you a lot right there. I think that Turner also, he's got an incredible glove. I mean, you watch him over at third base, some of the scoops and some of the picks that he makes out of the ground, it's kind of insane. I mean, you look at his reaction time, and it's kind of a head-scratching at how quick he's able to bring his glove up, snag the ball, and then again, his glove transition coming out of the glove is so fast, it's so clean. He's a very good fielder, not to mention he's got a great bat, and he's a leader. So I think that he's going to be a guy that, with the championship experience that he's got and his solid all-around play, he's going to be a likely suitor for, I think, a lot of teams. Now, coming at number 8, and again, some people might be shocked by this, but I quite frankly don't think anyone should, because it's Nelson Cruz. He's been one of the best DHs in baseball the last 3 years. And it's another aging superstar, sure, but I'm not sure if aging is fair to say about Cruz. Mainly because he's still putting up career numbers, and he's now into his 40s. He's that old, and he's still been able to do this good of a job, and he's still been able to go this far along into his MLB career. That should say something. He's batted over 300 in each of the last 2 years, and he's been one of the top home run hitters in the league. And in 2019, he hit 41 bombs, and then this year in the shortened season, and again, yes, it was a shortened season, he still hit 16 home runs. So if you think about that, 16 homers in 60 games for a guy that's 40 years old, that's a pretty good pace, if you ask me. I mean, again, 162 games, you're still about, a third of the way through of a technical season just about. But if you figure that, I don't know, I'm not going to do quick. I mean, that's close to 50 home runs, you would think, just about, if he was a third of the way through and he hit 16 homers, 15 times through would be 45. So, 48, 49 homers in a long, an entire season was the pace that he was on. That's not too bad of a pace, if you ask me. And not to mention, he's been a run-driving monster, with 3 of his last 5 seasons racking up 100-plus RBIs. So he'll be getting a lot of people scored, and he's got a really, really solid bat, which is still producing at a very high level late into his career. But the one worry is that he's semi-limited as to where he could go, since he really only DHs. He's never in the field, and that's going to really limit him to just the AL. And if the NL doesn't approve the DH for the next year, then Cruz will probably have to stay in the American League, which without a doubt. And I think that might limit where he could land, but he's still got a lot of landing spots. And if he's still valuable, you're going to have to find a way to get his bat in the lineup no matter what. So even if you're an AL or NL person, or a team, you're going to have to figure out a way to get Nelson Cruz in your lineup. So coming in at number 7, Michael Brantley. Again, I've really liked how consistent Michael Brantley has been over the years, and he would be a massive addition for any teams looking to add hitting to their lineup, because Brantley has put up very solid numbers, really a hitting clinic the last few years for the Astros. This past year, he was still that constant, steady hitter he's been since 2014, batting .300 with 5 home runs and 22 RBIs with an .840 OPS. So clearly he's been hitting well with the last few years at least. And he's also had a string of 300-plus years. With the last 3 of them, he's been hitting 300 or better. But then in 6 of the last 7 years, he's batted, he hasn't batted lower than .295. So he's been a very consistent hitter. I think the one year he batted .230, but everything else has been .295 or higher. And if you've got those numbers, and again, you're in your early 30s, I think you're a very likely target for a lot of teams. Now, where could he land? No idea. I know. No idea. But I will say, I know Milwaukee just freed up some space in their outfield with Ryan Braun now going to free agency, and Brantley was drafted by the Milwaukee Brewers back in 2005. Maybe a little reunion there. I don't know. But I do know is whoever picks him up is going to be very happy, because they're going to be benefited greatly to having that bat in that lineup. And again, it's not necessarily the power numbers he brings. He doesn't have great power numbers. His OPS floats between 750 and 850 just about, sometimes in the upper 800s. It's never going to inch past 950. But if you still have a guy that's consistently getting on base, there's not a whole lot more you can ask for, in my opinion. Now, coming in at number 6, Marcus Semien. And this might be a little unusual to have him in the top 10, but when the guy finishes 3rd in the MVP voting in 2019, so just a year ago, he was the 3rd in the MVP voting, I think it's safe to say he's one of the better names on the market this offseason. He's got great pop in his bat, and as he showed, he could really hit for a large amount of homers, as he knocked 33 bombs last year with 92 RBIs. And he had a career high in OPS with 892, and his OPS plus was above 100 for the first time in his career last year. Now, if this 2020 year, if he had been a free agent, he probably would have found himself on a huge contending team, but unfortunately he had this performance a year shy of his free agent year, because this year he was not that great. But Semien has the capabilities of being a really good player and a very good hitter. He could be a solid bat for really any team, I think, in a lot of lineups. Problem is, as a shortstop, he would really have to carve his way into the starting lineup for some of these teams, because they already have that cornerstone shortstop that they need for their team. However, if Lindor for the Indians were to get traded, the Indians could go after Semien, who didn't show this year that he was really worthy of a huge contract, as his numbers really digressed this year compared to last year, with him hitting .223 this season, which is a career low for him, actually. So, again, being able to add him and being able to bring his bat in the lineup, I think it's going to open so many doors. And if you get him on, again, they can get him for cheap. The Indians are trying to limit the amount of money that they spend, and that would be a perfect person to go after. Now, if that does happen, I think that he could be a steal, in all honesty, and I think that he could be one of the more kind of, not, I don't want to say under the radar, but underappreciated pickups in free agency, and I think it could have one of the best return on investments, if you will, for Marcus Semien and for whatever team he lands on. So coming in at number 5, getting my top 5 best free agents this offseason, George Springer, without question. I mean, he'd be a huge ad for anyone. He's an all-star the last 3 seasons. He's batted well for the most part, and not a stellar average. I mean, he batted a career .270 from the plate. It's an okay average, not great, not bad. It's all right. And he has shown the ability to drive in large amounts of runs, though, and he's been able to really rack up a lot of home runs. He had 39 bombs in 2019, and from 2016 to 2019, he had 25 or more home runs in 3 of those 4 years. So clearly a very consistent home run hitter as well, which is always something that you want, especially out of an outfield player. So the hitting is there. No question. And the fielding is solid as well. I've seen many things about, where he could go because he is going to have probably a huge contract, I believe. He's been instrumental in the success of the Astros. He's been an all-star. He's been at the top of the game for the last couple of years. Even though there is a big asterisk, I think hovering around all the success that the Astros had, he still played very, very well. And, if Jackie Bradley Jr. is not around next year for the Red Sox, that would be a huge landing spot for him. I think he would fit right into that Boston, outfield and really in that lineup. And really wherever he goes, that's going to be a ginormous ad for that team. And he's really probably going to change that team's, the perception that people have of that team. For example, again, I always bring up Trevor Bauer, and kind of now the Reds are kind of on people's radar now because of what he's been able to do. So George Springer could have that similar effect. Now, coming in at number 4, Marcell Ozuna. This should not be a shock either. Ozuna really put himself in that conversation for having an MVP this year. Not sure why he wasn't nominated. I personally thought that he had a better overall year than Manny Machado did. Manny Machado, people kind of forget, he had a really poor, I think it was beginning to middle August, where he was batting near 220. Now, he did turn things around, but I think that Ozuna consistently was way better than him the entire season. And though he has made teams aware of his hitting ability, that is Ozuna, and as a result, it'll definitely make him a likely, a likely get for a lot of these teams and a lot of these contending teams, because they're going to see, hey, we want to add some power hitting. Well, we know exactly who to reach out to. Marcell Ozuna. You lead the NL in home runs, you lead the NL in RBIs, and you've got above a 330 batting average. You're going to catch a lot of people's attention without question. Now, Ozuna has he's always had power in his bat without, no question about that. He's hit 20 or more homers from 2016 to 2019, and this past year he had a career year with career highs in batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS. So if this doesn't bring attention his way, then I'm not sure what will, because that should be some glaring evidence as to why he should be paid A, a large contract, and B, land on a contending team. I've seen a lot of rumors going around about possibly him landing on the Chicago White Sox, which would be wildly interesting, I think. And from they could form a little super team with him and Eloy Jimenez, and then also Jose Abreu. Not to mention, we're forgetting about my man Tim Anderson. I'm a huge Tim Anderson fan. And Nick Madrigal. I think that Nick Madrigal is going to slowly, kind of rise through the rankings for that White Sox team. He had a really good year this past year, and he's young. He's got a lot of time to develop. The power numbers are, again, really highlighted in his hitting. I think something that teams are going to pay attention to. And with Chicago's already heavy hitting lineup and the power that they possess in the lineup, I think this is going to be, something special. And, we could really see something brewing here in the Windy City, and it won't involve the Cubs for once. That'll be also another kind of unique situation, if you will. Now, coming in at number 3, DJ LeMahieu. These last 3 should not be shocks. I think we could probably all guess who the top 2 are. LeMahieu has been probably the best second baseman, I would say, in the last 3 years. I think it's safe to say that he's on top of the world right now with how well he's been playing, especially this past year. Led the AL this year in batting average, 364, hit 10 homers, 27 RBIs, hit a 1.011 OPS. He's really put himself into the conversation for MVP, which actually, at least in the last few years, and then this past year, he was actually a candidate for the MVP award. Unfortunately, did not win it. Jose Abreu, again, rightfully so, won it, but I think DJ LeMahieu would have been a fair second choice. And since 2015, he's only batted lower than 300 one time. So no matter what the hitting, that'll come. No matter what the hitting is, it will definitely be there. And he's got a great glove, too. He's been a Gold Glover. He's been a Silver Slugger, a 3-time All-Star guy, 3-time Gold Glover. It's going to be a huge get for any team that is looking to add to their infield and their hitting, because LeMahieu can easily provide both. So then my last 2, number 2, JT Realmuto, and then number 1, Trevor Bauer, we really had an entire conversation on both of them. I don't really think that there's any... We don't really need to, bring back any sort of, points to make about them. They are clearly the 2 best free agents on the market this year. Realmuto with his hitting ability, with his fielding as a catcher, that's something that's very unique. Not to mention him as a catcher and his ability to hit as a catcher is very unique. So I think teams are going to be very interested in him. He's probably going to get paid quite a bit of money, but Trevor Bauer is going to be the one that really gets paid. I think he's going to get an astronomical deal. He's got a lot of pull right now because he won the NL Cy Young, so as a result, it makes it a little bit easy on him to say, hey, I had under a 2 ERA. I was one of 3 guys to have triple-digit strikeout numbers this year, and I led the NL in ERA plus and in WHIP. So right there, I think that should tell you a lot about Trevor Bauer, and I won the NL Cy Young Award. So he would probably say all of that to whatever team he would be, negotiating with, mainly because of, again, he's got such a great ability as a pitcher. He's got great command. He's got a great arsenal amount of pitches. So I think that in the long run, Trevor Bauer, and we went into this in the second segment, who's going to be more valuable between these two? Bauer probably, but I think there's a lot more risk that comes with Bauer. And Realmuto, I think for the long run, will probably pay a little bit more dividend to whomever picks him up. But again, those are my top 10 free agents. I think there's a lot of guys that have done a really nice job all year long. Some guys have put themselves into better positions for this free agency market, and some guys not so much. So it'll be interesting to see, what teams read into and what teams don't in terms of their statistics and kind of where, they kind of fit into some of these teams' lineups. But I think ultimately it's going to be a really fun offseason, and I just can't wait to hear where these guys land. So that'll wrap it up for us here today, folks. Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice little review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd really appreciate that. Want to keep you all up to date and in the loop on all these free agent signings that'll be coming up probably very soon, I would think. Thank you again, everyone, for listening, and until next time, have a fantastic day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.